One thing is that when we are talking about centrality of Central Asia, when we are talking about this particular area, that we are dealing with more than 20,000 gold pieces, and each of these gold pieces primarily comes from like these sacred grounds, that we are talking about a highly decentralized type of entity that only once it was unified under a king called Ateus, A-T-E-A-U-S. And then it falls apart again into decentralized entities. Now, all these decentralized kingdoms have sacred grounds, and primarily when we are talking about some of these gold pieces that are found, they are from those kurgans, funerary sites of the royalty that at one point ruled this area. Now, when we are talking about kurgans, primarily, they have its own history. When we are talking about Mons, we are talking about rubbles. We are talking about relatively a small rubble shape and form, and then afterwards, primarily, gradually, they became more sophisticated when we are dealing with constructing like kurgans underneath as like cells, as like rooms, and then with enforced timber. And then we find some of these kurgans as family kurgans. And then at the same time, when we are talking about royalty of these groups of people, like when we talk about Scythians, Sarmatians, Sakas, Huns, some of these like nomads to the north, primarily between 7th century BC to 4th century BC is the peak of kurgan making. So there are some kurgans prior to that era of time that are not as sophisticated, and primarily there are 20 very large kurgans prior to that era and time. But then when we are talking about the sorry about this. That was red, now it's green. Green light. So let's play with this for a few minutes, and then it falls apart, and I put it down, and then I continue again. So here, we have it. So when we are talking about like the Altai Mountains, this was one place when we are talking about Altai Mountains that primarily there is a place that they found 41, 42 of these kurgans that primarily was the major source of quite a few of these gold pieces. Now, everything was so secretive during Soviet period. I remember that we went to one of these conferences. It was the late 1980s at the time of President Gorbachev, and opening as it started, and Professor Marshak was talking about some of these excavation and research. And he died a few years ago, and he actually invited us to participate in some of the excavation and research done on the shore of Zarafshan River in Central Asia. But at that time, he was talking about some of the excavation and research that he has gone through, and he came from St. Petersburg, actually. Then somebody asked that, do you have safety, security for all these excavation sites? He said, yeah, maybe for 2,000 of them. But you know that there are over 100,000 of them. So we are talking about tip of the iceberg as far as archaeology, as far as history of humankind, as far as centrality of, now this area primarily, now is this thing working? No. When we are talking about centrality of Central Asia, primarily this is one of the areas that we are talking about. We are talking about the beginning of time, that we are dealing with highly centralized type of activities as far as archaeological artifacts that besides like the gold pieces that we are dealing with also quite a few pottery pieces and quite a few horse equipment and fabric pieces, especially felt. So primarily we are talking about, as far as the place, the vast plain which stretches from lowlands of Central Europe eastward to the borders of China constituted the this undisputed homeland of considerable number of nomadic tribes. And then as far as time from the first millennium BC to the end of first millennium AD, these nomads were able to affect events occurring in the ancient world to a quite surprising degree. Now then, we're going to go back actually to ancient times. But then when we talk about the fall of Soviet Union and what is happening today, primarily, a lot of attention, almost every single U.S. Petroleum natural gas company now has contracts with Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. First Kazakhstan and then the rest of the area were actually complaining that why is it that we are left behind or you are not paying attention to us as far as interaction, communication, and contracts on various aspects of activities. But then we know that within the last 11 or 12 years, just about 11 or 12 years, the country of Turkmenistan has emerged as the fourth largest producer of natural gas and exporter of natural gas. So when we are dealing with centrality of Central Asia, you see Tengiz oil field here at the tip of the Caspian Sea. Next to Tengiz oil field offshore, we are dealing with another oil field that was found not too long ago, a few years ago, Kashagan oil field, Kashagan, Kashagan. These are largest oil fields than Saudi Arabian oil fields. Like 57% of petroleum of the world came from Persian Gulf that you see tip of it here. But now we are now dealing with energy, that the issue of energy is so central to our time. And primarily we are dealing with like energy sources that comes from the Caspian Basin area, that the laser photos by the French and Americans in 1980s actually shows the fact that, that Caspian has three reservoirs, northern, central, and southern, it is sitting on top of one of the largest, actually, petroleum natural gas storages in the world. So when we are talking about Kazakhstan, primarily we are dealing with the northern tip of Caspian, and when we are dealing with Turkmenistan is the extension of the southern, and that when we are talking about like places like Azerbaijan, that primarily the name is there, but that one of the earliest actually discovery of oil happens within this area that is belong to that particular time and place. Centrality of Central Asia comes when we are dealing about the New Silk Road. The New Silk Road was something that, as a collaboration of United States, China, Russia, and India came into existence. What you see here that is being materialized, now there are a lot of talk about Eurasian land bridge. Now this land bridge, that primarily a huge amount of it actually, Kazakhstan was the very first country actually. President Nazarbayev from Kazakhstan was the very first member of this committee activities that was campaigning to expand this land bridge or the New Silk Road that the New Silk Road, you see the road right up there. But it has actually three extensions. One is the Steppe Road, one is the Central, and one is the Southern route. And as you can imagine, as the map shows, the southern route of this New Silk Road, because of war in Afghanistan, because of war in Iraq, because of war in Syria, because of situation in Iran, primarily is less developed or less actually invested in, although all the indication shows the fact that at one point those activities will continue. But here we are dealing a multi-billion-dollar investment by number of different countries that now you look up some sources like a year ago maybe says 117 countries are now participants, and then now like last few weeks you look at it 124 countries. Now they think that this is a global phenomenon that is going to go through somehow addressing the issue of poverty, unemployment, deprivation all around the world. But then there are conflicts, and as you have seen within the last few weeks, we are going through this trade war that part of it is actually agreeing on this apparatus that primarily who is going to be sharing how much of this pie. Now, when we were in Washington not too long ago, we asked that, well, what is our position after all from moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats? And they said, oh, as long as they want to share the pie, they don't want to dominate, it's okay. But then because of this new phenomena being materialized, aggression from some of the parties is beyond imagination, as we can see it and feel it on daily basis. So when we get to Central Asia and Caspian Basin, you see that all these pipelines, and most of them are actually now gas pipelines, because now, as you see, that Europe is receiving gas from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, southern Siberia, and every single European country, actually, you see that the pipelines are going through, and they are pretty quiet about the whole thing, including like occupation of Georgia, that is still 1/3 of Georgia is occupied by Russian forces, and nobody talks about it. And primarily, this was the one footnote on that, is that from Turkmenbashi, that is on the eastern shore of Caspian, there is underground pipeline that is now connected. This is a little bit old map, but then, I mean, comparing, relatively speaking. And so when we are dealing, the contractors, they didn't want to bother with Russia, Iran, Afghanistan. They said there is a war going on. Iran is pretty unstable. We don't want to deal with Russians. So from Turkmenistan, from Turkmenbashi to Baku, and from Baku to Tbilisi in Georgia, and then from there to Ceyhan on the shore of the eastern port of Mediterranean Sea in Turkey. So when we are dealing with the occupation of Georgia primarily, after the first pipeline was made, the second pipeline, the third pipeline that started, Mr. Putin occupied their forces was half an hour from Tbilisi. This is, we don't hear it in the news, but is this the safe route you were talking about? So then the petroleum natural gas companies came and said, hey, what's going on? What do you want? So now that we see that quite a few of these pipelines also goes through Russia primarily, is another one of those aggressive type of activities that we are dealing with. Now, as a result of this, like the new Silk Road, as a result of this petrodollar boom within the area, it's actually natural gas type of boom that we have to talk about. Some of the cities, like this is Urumqi in Xinjiang, that huge amount of the industry has been actually moved, montage industry has been moved to Urumqi. And primarily, this is right after mid-1990s, that if you look up, like when we are talking about Central Asia, the amount of, now that was another issue when we are talking about the natural gas boom, centrality of Central Asia with gigantic type of reservoirs that has appeared. Now, as a result of the new Silk Road that we are dealing with, in 1995, President Clinton said that, well, look at the chart. Like during the empire, when we are talking about the Qing or Qing Empire, Qing or Ching, same These are Manchus from Central Asia who took over China, and primarily they became Sinophile, they became adopted Chinese culture, but at the same time, we are dealing with 1911, the fall of Manchus after almost 300 years. If you look at the chart, the Manchus, how much money they have spent in the area. If you look at the Republic of China, 1911, 1949, right before Mao Zedong, Chinese Revolution, People's Republic of China, before it was established. And then if you look at even at the time of Mao's China, Mao died in 1976, 1% of the budget of Chinese goes to Xinjiang, or the eastern part of Central Asia is still under their occupation. When President Clinton brought up that maybe we have to have an election here, and Chinese said, well, yeah, let's have from 3 to 4% Chinese, Han Chinese. All of a sudden, we are dealing with migration of millions of Chinese there. Within a couple years, they announced the fact that now we have 51% Han Chinese in Xinjiang. Let's have an election. So much for democratic elections, I guess. Now here is Urumqi that primarily at one point had 60-some% Uyghurs. Now Uyghurs are the majority minority within Xinjiang area. Now there are only 12% Uyghurs in their capital. This is regional capital of Uyghurs, that because Han Chinese have taken over. Now, petrodollar boom, natural gas boom. This is Astana, the new capital of Kazakhstan. Astana, A-S-T-A-N-A, that primarily in the Russian segment of Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan has 17 million population. 1991 fall, there was no majority. The first minority were Russian, 49%. Kazakh themselves were 38%. So now they moved their capital in 1997 to Astana, the new capital that is the coldest capital in the world. It's colder than Moscow, actually. A lot of people so excited moving to the area, and then after a year or two, they said that, oh, no, thank you. We go back to Almaty, to the south, our original capital. This is too cold for us. And then we have the Ashgabat. Somebody looked at it. This is, wow, victory of capitalism. Look at those, all that satellite dishes. Like, there are thousands hanging from the high rises. And yeah, okay, you want to keep everything secret from people. You have won your war. So when we are talking about the natural gas boom, we talked about Turkmenistan emerging as the fourth largest natural gas producer. So we are dealing with the new centrality of Central Asia in a sense. This is like the Independence Day in Turkmenistan, Ashgabat, their capital, and this is September, a couple years ago, September 2016. Now, when we go back to the history, now we are talking about a number of issues. So we talked about a little bit that when we are talking about Central Asia, there is a background to it as far as the steppe, the cultures, horse cultures, and the sheep cultures. But now, when we come to how people get to know some of these people from Central Asia, we have to somehow recognize some of the very first pioneers, actually, who contributed time, money, energy into studying some of the people from the area. We are looking at Arthur Pope and Phyllis Ackerman. That originally Phyllis Ackerman was one of the Arthur Pope's students, but then Arthur Pope primarily started doing excavation and research to the south of this area when we are talking about southern part of Central Asia. And they had 10 volumes, each volume 400, 500 pages, on various archaeological sites and various artifacts that they have found, dedicated their whole life to, especially Phyllis Ackerman, very much into iconographical type of images and analysis of iconographical images within this area, meaning of the prehistoric and ancient cults, religions, and icons that not necessarily were religious in any forms or shapes. And then primarily we are talking about Richard Fry, who died not too long ago, 2014. He was 93, 94 years old. The Heritage of Central Asia, the book that we have used. Primarily, he was one of the forerunners of research of an American scholar who had conducted more than 50 years of actually work in the field. And for the first time that I saw him, I was 10 years old. And he walked in a bookstore, and he was very tall, 6'4", 6'5", slender and tall. So I told my parents that, wow, this guy is very tall. But then primarily then I got to know him. His wife was teaching in Madison when I was going to school. So I saw him after a few decades. I said, wow, he looks familiar. Now, it gets to a point that when we are talking about lost enlightenment, Frederick Starr, Johns Hopkins University, actually, when a couple of years ago we went to Washington, I went and congratulated him on the book, Lost Enlightenment, that he has put together, that in the heart of dark ages, actually, we are dealing with an entity within Central Asia, 9th, 10th century primarily, that attracts huge number of scholars and intellectuals of their time. In the city of Bukhara, Bukhara is a cultural capital of the old Silk Road, Bukhara, B-O-K-H-A-R-A. And primarily, this safe haven attracted so many local intellectual artists, writers, and scientists, but also so many people from surrounding area. And this is a kind of a fascinating book that we have used it for a couple of classes already. So is The Heritage of Central Asia by Richard Fry. But then these are the sparkles, actually. These are the windows that have been totally closed for a long period of time. And for the first time, these are some of the scholars that bring this reality to the public, like all around the world, by their research. Now, one centrality of Central Asia is done by Christopher Beckwith from Indiana University, that primarily in his book, The Empires of the Silk Road, that we also have used that book. There's a section that actually surprises people when he talks about 3 distinct stages of migration from Eurasia. Now, this is a kind of a word that had not been used. And unfortunately, I was looking at the plan that they're going to implement for the university in few days, few weeks, I don't know, maybe next year or so, Asian studies, European studies. Oh, no, a lot of literature actually from Europe, because of this interaction communication, whether it's financial, whether it's petrodollar or natural gas, or so much like opening that is going on. They use, a lot of it is Eurasia they use. So there are 3 waves. End of 3rd millennium, we are dealing with Tokharians and Anatolians moving out of this place. Second wave, according to Beckwith, around 17th century BC, Indic, Greek, Italian, Germanic, Armenians, and some of the Indo-Iranians move out of this area. And then the third wave, late in 2nd millennium BC, the Celtic, Baltic, Slavic, Albanians, and Iranian people move out. Some to north, we are talking about North Indian subcontinent, some into Near East, Middle East, and some going westward from this area. Now, this is another interesting book if you want to look it up as far as some analysis about these mass migration of people, centrality of Central Asia that included so many of these nationality and ethnicities within. Now, from prehistoric time, they have found some of these, like in Koksu in Kazakhstan, they have found numerous, mostly all like prehistoric type of figures, or primarily, let's see how we are doing time-wise, profile view. So I thought to add few of these because primarily like the very first, I mean, studying about prehistoric time is something totally new. It starts with Altamira caves in Santander, northeast of Spain, actually, that an archaeologist is going in with his daughter, and his daughter kept on saying, "Hey, Dad, look up." And his dad was digging the floor of the cave, and all of a sudden he said, "What is it?" And then they look up, gigantic drawing, painting, etchings of various animals. And for years, they thought that this is forgery. Some people got drunk, and then they felt like, well, we have to do something strange, so let's paint the cave. So overnight, it was created, and they said that, okay, fine, you reported it, and now go home. So afterwards, like when we are talking about, like in the other places, some of these, prehistoric type of artifacts were found, and now in Central Asia they have found quite a few of them. Actually, this is in Kyrgyzstan, Cholpon. Sorry. Cholpon in Kyrgyzstan, that primarily, like again, we are talking about ibexes, we are talking about wild goats, and I thought to add a few of these, showing the fact that now, when we are talking about Russians, Tsar Russia, when we are talking about Peter the Great, they have no idea who these people are, how they lived, where they came from. And so when we are talking about so many of the Soviet and Russians and natives and other ethnicity, nationality that they actually added or allowed for them to participate in the excavation and research, is started contributing and shed more light on some of these totally unknown, the dark side of the moon exposed to light. So now when we are talking about the northern Mongolia, there is a good reason. There was another comment by student presentation that they said, well, we don't know that they are prehistoric or ancient excavation and research, but then what about early medieval times, or why is it that it's so uneven? So I was talking to some of Russian scholars that including Professor Marshak, and that I said, well, was there a race for whoever finds a bigger kurgan or finds more gold pieces that is now taken to Hermitage Museum? I said that, well, yeah, it really distorted the fact that there were so many archaeological sites that were somehow left because they know that it's important, prehistoric and otherwise ancient, but then they knew that if they find artifacts, it's going to be minor to those treasuries of the kings and queens, although now within the area, there is a movement that the native population are totally against breaking into the funerary sites of these like kurgans, because they identify them as their ancestors, and these are sacred grounds, and you are not supposed to be doing that. So that's one obstacle as far as finding more gold pieces. So like 1924, 1925, P.K. Kozlov excavated 8 Huns, Kurgans in northern Mongolia. And the reason is that when we are talking about occupation of Central Asia, primarily the Tsar forces occupying north the first half of 19th century. As a result, prior to that, during the time of the Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible in the history, they have massacred 2/3 of Tatars, which was the dominating actually ethnicity to the west. And now it's time for Kazakh, that they massacred 40% of Kazakh to occupy that area, and then they are moving south. So there is a civil war going on towards when the Tsar forces are moving towards south by the second half of 19th century. So like the archaeologists, this is not a fine place, good place for them. Then when we talk about Pazyryk, that those kurgans have been found, was a safe place comparing to the war zones that they wanted to somehow get active in. So northern Mongolia, that is low density of population and relatively peaceful, contains silk, wool fabric, tapestry, pottery, felt leather pieces, and embroideries brought to North Mongolia from Sogdia, China, Eastern Europe, and Near East, showing the fact that some of them were booties from the war, some of them were gifts to the chieftains or warlords, and primarily we are dealing with some of the earliest type of excavation and research, besides like those gold pieces that was found in the first half of 18th century onward. We are dealing with some of these kurgans. They come in this type of form and shape. This is in the background. You see Issyk Lake. Issyk Lake to the north of Kyrgyzstan. Issyk is Issukul, and primarily is a warm lake. Is a mineral lake that even at winter time is like 40-some degrees. People go and swim in there. But then some of these kurgans seems like this, when we are talking about sacred places, this is across the lake, that is Kazakhstan. So this is like northeast of Kyrgyzstan we are talking about. Now, there was a talk about horse culture. Look at the bones, that human bones that they found, and humongous amount of like horses that they were buried with them. So the love for the, we are talking about excavation sites, we are talking about horse cultures. So some of these excavation sites primarily yields huge number of human, and then more than, although some of them includes their dogs and cats, since the pets were also included as like family members, but a lot of horses. Now, this is Pazyryk that we were talking about, Altai Mountains. We are talking about where Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and Russia, the area that they have found within those 40-some kurgans we were talking about. They have found fascinating, like fabric pieces, felt, and otherwise pieces. Now, this is 7th century to 4th century BC we are dealing with. The centuries that these kurgans were at its peak. We are talking about hundreds of kurgans, and still nowadays they find new kurgans within the area. So like this is Pazyryk, Pazyryk. So animal style art was practiced by various groups of nomads who were often related yet always distinct: indigenous Altai, Sakha, Sarmatian, Scythians, and now, since we are going short of time, I want to move down to like when we are talking about centrality of, this is like from the, you saw it in the cover of the Christopher Beckwith book, but from the excavations that they have found, when they allowed some of the indigenous population, like the various ethnicity, nationalities get involved. There was one Kazakh archaeologist still alive, Akishov, Akishov, that coincidentally he was walking very close to actually the kurgans we were looking in Lake Issyk area, but crossed the lake in Kazakhstan. He was walking through these kurgans that they were maybe 11, 12 kurgans that he has found next to each other. And he noticed that they were all broken in by grave robbers. And usually grave robbers look for various type of like gold pieces, artifacts that they can somehow carry easily and make money out of it. So what he found actually was he actually stepped down on the same stepping stone that the grave robbers have digged through. And while he was examining what was left, when he was hitting the wall of that path, that route, he found out that there was like a hollow type of wall that he opened, and then he found this figure. Now it was called Gold Man. Now some people, there are articles saying that no, actually it was a gold woman. So we're not going to be discussing or arguing about that. But then Gold Man or Gold Woman, that primarily with 4,000 pieces of gold woven within. So this is based on this was on top, like on the cover of a National Geography piece, and then Beckwith used it. And now since then, since mid-1964, 65 that he found, they have found 3 more within the same area, actually, that when we are talking about horse cultures, you see that their crowns, their hats, dressings primarily include some of that. And so from now another archaeologist, Kuftin, that the Soviet archaeologists examined 42 of the Bronze Age burials and found that they dated from about middle of the 2nd millennium BC. And some of these burials included bronze figures, sophisticated style vessels of bronze, silver, and gold. Burial grounds, besides Pazyryk, they found Tokty, and then Shibe, and then Katanda that were excavated by a group of Soviet scholars, including Grazinov and Rodenko. So meanwhile, we are dealing with more excavation, and then at the same time, we are dealing with somehow reconstructing, rewriting the history of this area, which was to a large extent a mystery. This was from the first bronze show that actually came through this area and was exhibited in Helena and a couple of years ago. And they were fascinating bronze pieces that I thought to include in as some of these places besides gold and silver, a lot of bronze pieces that were. Now, when we are talking about Altai Mountains, primarily, we are dealing with the area that primarily the Irtysh River and Ob River go through here. And what has happened actually a couple of years after the fall of the Soviet Union, that some of the Russians and native scholars actually, when they went to Altai and what Rodenko has done, and a few others, his colleagues, they said, well, these people actually migrated. So they had summer places and winter places. So if this place was a summer place, then there were other places, winter places, that they took the rivers and they started traveling on the shore of the bank of the rivers. And vis-a-vis the fact that there was actually a report that they are building a dam on the extension of Ob River here. So they got into this area, Minosinsk area, that they found literally hundreds of kurgans and funerary sites, some estimates up to 2,000 of them. And then they actually brought President Putin to the area, and he actually stopped building that dam that would have flooded the area. So this is one of the new actually places that had been found not too long ago. And the archaeologists who found this place, they've won the highest awards in social sciences, humanities from Putin in Kremlin. And but then this has started also another political campaign that because there were a lot of literature as far as, well, we are talking about colonial era period, and then Tsar Russia was a colonial machine that actually massacred people, expanded into this area that was not Russian at all. And then when this area, actually Minosinsk, was found, the statement that Putin made was that, well, look, these are our ancestors also, like many other ancestors who migrated from this area. So what we did actually, we didn't colonize this area, but we actually expanded back to the area that our ancestors had come from. So it started another nonsensical type of back and forth type of arguments, or if it's from Kremlin, please don't answer the phone. We don't want any more arguments. Sorry. So within the Pazyryk, primarily the oldest fabric or woven, actually a carpet has been found 2,500, 2,600 years old that we are looking at. I'm going to move down actually into, okay, let's look at this. When we are talking about the three more of these, this is originally the gold man or gold woman that was found by Akhitchev, and then three more of them. This is Astana, the new capital, and that is the map of Kazakhstan actually. Entering the museum, primarily, this is like the ground floor of the museum and identified as our ancestors. So there was the perception that that dichotomy or that Asia, Europe, they said that no, all these people, ethnicity, nationality, somehow are identified as our ancestors, regardless of race, gender, nationality, ethnicity, background. Stop that nonsense. And this is one of the pieces of Peter the Great that actually was moved to Hermitage Museum, 7th to 4th century BC. That shows a couple of this is actually a belt buckle that went around and it locked in. And we are looking at horses, talking about horse cultures, and then a couple of these Scythian Sakas that are having good time sitting underneath a tree. Let's talk a little bit about what we were talking earlier. We said that we're going to go back as far as some of these this is the golden age that actually when we are talking about the Frederick Starr talks about that so we are talking about 9th to 10th century primarily, that when we are talking about Bukhara, when we are talking about centrality of Central Asia within the heart of the Dark Ages, that we are dealing with development of scholarship in the Samanid era, 9th to 10th centuries, mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, medicine, history, philology, that primarily when we are talking about Avicenna, who died like 1037, his book, Qanun, primarily, Shafa, Danishnameh, Rubai, But his book, Qanun, primarily was, for 500 years, was used in various universities in Europe and elsewhere, very famous for his discovery. The other individual that Starr talks about is Biruni, that one of his favorite actually, that has written also Athar al-Baqiya, means the leftover from the past, literally what it means. Tafhim, astronomy, rules of determining the specific gravities of minerals. But then he did something that is amazing, that the circumference of the Earth, he had come up with the number that after 500 years, when in modern times, once again, the Earth was actually measured, they came that, wow, he came so close to that number. And that is why Starr thinks that he was a genius of his time, determining the specific gravities of minerals. That's another project that he got him to involve into. So we are looking at Avicenna 980 to 1037, and then Biruni 973, 1048, Avicenna and then Biruni, that primarily the city that he came from is in Kharaz, south of Aral Sea, was called Kath, K-A-T-H. Now it's called Biruni, named after him. So we are talking about a couple of these geniuses. Now, field of learning, we are talking about philosophy, Farabi, mathematics, Khwarazmi, astronomy, Biruni, medicine, Avicenna, geology, earth sciences, Razi. Razi is the one who actually discovered sulfuric acid, many different type of alcohols that he came up with their formula. So being from southern part of Caspian, from the west, and he ended up going to Bukhara and staying there for a while. History and anthropology, Bayhaqi, and Bayhaqi primarily became a prime minister for a short period of time, became prime minister of Samanid within this time when we talked about 9th, 10th century. And Starr, Frederick Starr talks about, like some of these scholars within his book, that talking about centrality of Central Asia, attracting so many of these people within this particular era and time. So when we are talking about medieval times, so-called Middle Ages, middle between what? Middle of what? Of classical period and Renaissance. Primarily we are talking about two peaks, and then in old days, old times, they did not pay so much attention to it. Now when we are talking about Europe, primarily we have dark ages from the fall of Rome up to the coronation of Charlemagne in 800 in Rome, and then from 800 to 1000 early, we are talking about early medieval ages or medieval time. Then we have 1000 to 1140s like Romanesco, and then 1140s through 16th century, the Gothic era. But here we are dealing with another golden age that Starr talks about beside 9th, 10th century, although the area goes through depopulation, massacre of Mongols in 13th century actually happens. But then somehow people come back and there is a kind of a renaissance, a rebuild, revival of civilization and culture within this area. But this time through a neighboring, actually, city-state called Samarkand. And Samarkand was rebuilt, and this is the time that when we are talking about Timurid, like the 14th, 15th century, that golden age that Starr talks about actually comes back. So we are looking at Khwarazmi. Isaac Newton actually has references to him because he was a mathematics genius when we are talking about logarithm and then calculation of some of these numbers that goes into sophisticated type of formulas. He was the one who had contributed a great deal. When we are dealing with the Almaty University that has been named after him, that primarily we are looking at President Nazarbayev and some faculty students and the rest of the university there. I think I'm going to stop right here and ask whether you have any question, comments. We're going to talk actually about all this. There is a course that is going to be offered, Central Asian Civilization and Culture 214, 241, sorry, that was the old name, old number for it. They have changed those numbers so often. 241, that is Anthropology 241. We're going to be talking about some of these ups and downs of Central Asia in details. So here we have Mongol invasion of 1220, 1273, 1276, 1279, 1316. Massacre after massacre within this era and time. You see Bukhara as city of the books. That was when we are talking about the concentration of scholars between 815 to 999, that a military coup actually happens, bringing down someone. Any question, comments before we conclude this session? Yeah, please.
Or do the Kazakhs in the Astana region, do they consider themselves Russians then? Are they? Do they have their own ethnicity that they pride themselves in versus being just, you know?
Yeah. No, very good question. Actually, it's very nice seeing you, actually, after a long time. No, Kazakh actually, there was a gigantic campaign against Russians after the fall of Soviet Union. It continued for over a decade. When Yeltsin came to power in like 1991, there were 2 elections every 5 years. There was he was re-elected 1996, and then when Putin came 2001. Actually, after a short while, he went to Kazakhstan and asked them not to bother with this campaign, that radio and television and newspaper magazines were all blaming Russians. And the reason was that that's an excellent question in a sense that the arsenal of Soviet Union was not in Russia. It was in Kazakhstan. So when we are talking about the shore of Irtysh River, they are underground facilities that you cannot find it on any map. It was biological, chemical, nuclear facilities that primarily we are talking about an arsenal of thousands of long-range missiles, middle-range missiles heading towards United States and Europe and Japan and elsewhere all around. And when we are talking about Kazakhstan, over 400 nuclear tests actually was conducted, many of them until mid-1960s in Kazakhstan, not in Russia. So we are talking about a gigantic, and then when we are talking about the prison system, the Kulak system that the southern Siberia, Far East, but Kazakhstan was one of those places that when Stalin built over 30,000 prisons, and by late 1930s, there were more people in prison than outside. We in Kazakhstan had a gigantic share of that. So yeah, the Kazakh was very disappointed. They thought that, well, if it's going to be a World War III, they're going to be the first target was Kazakhstan, not Russia, because all that arsenal was sitting there. And then because they used to take kids like kindergarten, first graders to these overground explosion, nuclear explosion, 5 in the morning, and in no time they lost a generation to all sorts of radioactivity type of consequences of exposure to radiation. Yeah. So there were a number of good reasons because of say that, well, you better stay out, and that's enough of that. I was very surprised that last campaign, nobody talked about that, how much time, money, energy was spent on dismantling these things in mid-1990s at the time of President Clinton. Nobody talked about it during that campaign. That was a gigantic story. That is savior of humankind from all these ugly missiles. Yeah.
Do all these people speak different languages, or how are the languages in that region?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Actually, when we are talking about 1930s, for a short period of time, they implemented Latin, but then they went to Cyrillic. And anyone who had any other book, belonged to any other ethnicity, nationality, language, had 10 years in jail when everybody was going to jail. So a lot of people, when we were traveling within the area, one of the things that they said that, well, grandparents had told our parents that when peace comes back here, go and dig under that old oak tree, you will find few things that we have left. So they dig some of these old books, besides the fact that huge number of them were burnt or destroyed. But then now, many of these places, old cities, have libraries from the books that were hidden at one point from within that campaign. Yeah, so for a period of time, after that, Stalin thought that he can go to the moon with thugs in the street. Then he decided, well, maybe, he said, no, Lenin was right. You know, we have to send people to school. So schooling became mandatory after that. First, we are dealing with what is called indigenization in the Soviet period, that they brought in so many different ethnicities, and all leftovers, aliens from the old system. But then they were the ones who criticized the government more than anything else. Whatever came from Moscow, they made fun of it. This doesn't make sense. What are you talking about? So he blacklisted them. So when we are talking about purges that happens in 1930s, primarily a lot of people were those people who naturally they said that he doesn't make sense, you know. And so they were taken to those areas. But then when we are talking about mandatory education, after purges primarily, then Cyrillic was the only language, yeah, for at least period of time. Now, when we are talking about Kazakhstan, President Nazarbayev said that, oh, we have 15 national languages. But then just an example, and then they said that, well, what's going to be the primary language of the Congress, of the parliament? So, oh, parliament, yeah, Kazakh and Russian. So, well, how about our kids? If our kids, there are 8,000 schools in Kazakhstan. 6,000 of them are non-Russian and Kazakh. So they said that if we go to school, our kids go and learn their own languages, although there are 50-some different major nationality, ethnicity, and over 100, like with the smaller groups. Then they said that, well, that's unfair because our kids cannot compete with people if the language of the parliament is Russian or Kazakh, you know, what we're going to be doing. So now many of those schools teach Russian or Kazakh or both of them. They have gone back to old system in a way. Yeah, there are fascinating stories about some of these phenomena. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm curious about the relationship between Chinese-speaking minorities in Kazakhstan and Xinjiang in China, because that's a very significant place for the One Belt, One Road project. And I'm wondering if there's been any new attempt for recognition by Chinese-speaking minorities in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, China is another gigantic story that primarily, actually Xinjiang area that we were talking about briefly, has a Russian actually community, large Russian community. Some of them has fled during the Tsar Russia time, some of them during the Soviet period. But then when we are talking about Chinese, when we were traveling a couple of years after the fall and then every 2-3 years, for about 10, 11, 12 years, there was not a single Chinese on the buffer zone, there was a 20 miles, 25 miles buffer zone between Soviet Union and China. People lived there, but nobody could travel through, especially because of friction that started between Mao and Stalin. But then afterwards, when we went, maybe the third or fourth time we went there, we were traveling through the roads, and all of a sudden we saw pockets of Chinese in the middle of the road talking. So who are these guys? Are these Chinese? They said, yeah, this is the new relationship, especially after those petroleum and natural gas fields were found. Then China started negotiating with Kazakh, with Turkmenistans. Now there are pipelines a couple of years ahead of time going all the way to Shanghai from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. So all of a sudden, the next time we were there, 2-3 years later, we are talking about 2003, 2004, almost every single, you go to the bazaar, to the public market, huge amounts of Chinese products, and then Chinese, there were over 700,000 Chinese, Han Chinese, building roads that had deteriorated for years, and then doing power lines that we are dealing with, like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Kyrgyzstan started at first after about couple of years after the fall of the Soviet Union, starting building 67 dams on. They have 900 rivers and streams, actually. It is the top of the world we are talking about. And so hydroelectric power, we're talking about petroleum and natural gas now, Kyrgyzstan hydroelectric power, that now 10% of it is for the domestic use, and they're going to be selling a huge amount of it to China and India. And then 6-7 years after, the Tajiks started that because primarily Tajikistan went through a civil war that off and on was disrupting any type of internal affairs. And now they are building 60-some different dams that hydroelectric power, they're going to be, and Chinese are part of that, like the power lines that. But then, yeah, I mean, there were Chinese within the area, minority that they were, as many other minorities for a period of time, they were almost disregarded. But now it's quite different, actually. Depending where you are, things have changed. Actually, I think that maybe Kyrgyzstan is mostly more open than any other of these Stan states, republics. And then the worst were probably Uzbekistan under the rule of Karimov. Karimov died a couple of years ago. They called him Little Stalin. And also when we are talking about Niyazev in Turkmenistan, that also he died after a couple of heart attacks a few years ago. Those had real bad human rights violations and disregard for the other nationality, ethnicities, and people. Yeah. Any other question, comments? Thank you so much. Thanks much. Thanks.